This class continues our look into performance measurement and is based to some extent on a previous video on this topic. So let's now look at investment indicators. Well, these measures the amount of resources expended on a specific program or activity, or the unit cost, the cost per number of units produced, let's say. So investment indicators are trying to assess the effectiveness of the investment. Was the investment worthwhile, or is future investment worthwhile in this area? So it's trying to look at the amount of resources that are tied up in resources such as capital, machines, premises, office furniture, and so on, and trying to look at the return on that investment to see if it's a worthwhile investment. Now, this may be measured by by operating costs per unit produced. So the investment, to see if it's a good idea, if we look at the pre-investment period, look at the cost of production before the investment took place. Look at that cost of production. Now try to imagine there has been investment in modern, sophisticated equipment. Now look at the operating cost again and see what the impact of the investment has had on the operating costs. That might be an indication as to whether the investment was a good idea or not. Try to look at the capital costs per unit produced. It's very difficult to work out these figures, and many are put off even trying. When we think of output in, let's say, a manufacturing setting, the output is produced by workers and machines. Now, what is the contribution of the worker and what's the contribution of the machine? Could it be that the output has increased because workers have become more efficient? Perhaps learning by doing, learning the job and learning what's required in the job and performing the functions more efficiently. Or could it be the machines have become more productive, new functionality, better quality machines? So it's difficult to work out the costs per unit produced. The capital costs, I should say, per unit produced. It's difficult to isolate out capital from labour in many circumstances. The cost per customer of sales and marketing expenses. Well, cost and management accountants are probably the most expert at trying to work these things out. But they would also say that it's a very complicated calculation. And really the scale of the operation, the scale of the business would have to be large to justify even attempting to work these indicators out. It would cost a lot to try and get this information. The cost per unit after sales service and customer support. Well, in a sense, working out how much does the after sales service cost and what does the customer support cost, look at the number of units sold and divide one by the other. That could give us a crude measure. You could do the same, by the way, for sales and marketing, the number previous one, 3, but it's very difficult to work out precisely the cost per customer based on these, because these functions don't start and end within one department. After sales services might also involve feedback from production, from research and development, from the marketing section, all giving inputs into what happened, what's the best way forward, what's the solution. But having said all of that, it's still necessary for business to have some sort of indicator, because without these indicators the business is just drifting along. The indicators are attempting to measure performance and feedback some information to management which will help management to refine the whole processes, to look critically at what it's doing, to make changes where appropriate, and ultimately reduce costs, improve quality, improve customer satisfaction and customer requirements, meet the customer requirements more effectively, and make a profit. Because these are some of the key functions of the business. Now, separate strategic goals into input and output dimensions. It's important to look at the strategic goals in terms of both inputs and outputs, because it's the interplay between inputs and outputs that determines the efficiency of the business. So if we're looking at performance measures, presumably we should be looking at inputs and outputs to try and gauge the performance of the business. So measurement, coupled with the vision, mission and values of the organization, help to identify key results. And the key result areas of the organization where change and improvement is possible and desirable, to be more specific. So it's looking at the measurements from the various indicators that we can imagine, and couple that with where the business wants to be and how effective it appears to be in running its operation and trying to achieve its vision and mission. These are the key results. This is the outcome. The outcome are the key results. To what extent is the business meeting its targets? To what extent is investment and volume and quality and sales and all of the other areas that we can imagine indicators being based upon, to what extent is the feedback from those, the measurement of those and the information that's picked up from their analysis, to what extent does that suggest that the business is achieving its key results? And that's a very important outcome. When setting strategic goals, it is desirable to dissect the goal into the input and output dimensions, because, as I said earlier, that is what will give us an indication of the efficiency of the business. The efficiency of the business is a representation of the speed and accuracy of the transformation of inputs into outputs. Now, broad measures of goal effectiveness. Well, the input dimension first. Looking at unit cost. Now, as I said earlier, it may be difficult to work out the unit cost because the unit cost may be the product of capital time, worker time. It may be related to the cost of buying, the cost of the materials. There may be many dimensions to the unit cost. The overhead costs have to be apportioned as well. So it's not an easy calculation. But try to get some fix on the input dimension. Try to get some fix. Try to work out as accurately as possible and as efficiently as possible. Try to work out the unit cost of production. Try to work out how well materials are used. Look for waste to see if there are wastages in the system. The waste could be raw materials, or it could be components, or it could be wasted machine time or worker time. Waste can happen in many areas. But try to look at where waste occurs. Try to determine how much labour is used and look at excess idle time when workers are standing around waiting for something to happen, waiting for the work to come their way so that they can carry on performing their tasks. And look at the overheads. The overheads in terms of the premises, the insurance, the tax on the business, perhaps the property tax on the business. Look at all of the overheads that are carried and are borne by the product, the office costs, the consumable costs from everything from the pens, the paper, the printing, all of that. Look at all of it as necessary expenditure, but to what extent is it wasteful? What economies can be brought to bear. Then look at the output dimension. Internal results, maintaining and improving quality, and lower consumer prices. The idea is to give customers good satisfaction and make the customers happy with the product they're purchased, so they will return and they'll have repeat orders. And the way to do that is to give them good quality at a price which is good. It's a competitive price. Give them a good experience. And that's what the marketing department is attempting to do. So the output there in terms of the internal results, and the external, looking at financial returns, improve market share, meet current and future demand. It's important that the external part of the business, looking at its competitive environment, that the company is well positioned for the long-term success of the business. So that's an output dimension. Look at its research and development and its innovation and what it can bring to bear in the future in terms of meeting future customer demand, because customers are becoming more sophisticated and they want more for their money and they want more sophisticated products. So it's important to have an ongoing process of innovation and change within the business. So we can envisage it as internal, looking at improved quality and lower consumer prices, and external, looking at the forces outside the business that are pushing the business in various ways. The external competitive environment, looking at how it meets the requirements of government in terms of employment, training, health and safety for the workers. So there are many external pressures on the business that need to be met as well. So we can imagine measurement goals aimed at the input, looking at unit costs and trying to work out the unit cost of the business, the unit cost of the products that it produces, looking at the materials, the labour, the overheads and so on, and also the output dimension, looking at the quality issues and the price of the product, and also the external factors that impinge upon the business. Now, output measures for each goal. Well, output is achieved in various ways. So outputs are achievements, and these may be categorized into various groups. For example, investment returns. Well, that's the return on the investments that the company has made. So it's an output. The output of the business yields the return, which is the investment return. But the output could also be related to customer satisfaction, the extent to which the customers are happy with the output of the business. Could be the social impact on the business has on the local community or in the local setting. What are its policies related to the local community in terms of transport disruption, noise, pollution, employment, training? What is the impact of the business? That's an output of the business. Some of the outputs are negative, pollution for example. Some are positive, employment opportunities within the local area. But these are measures of output that can be envisaged related to a company. Now the financial returns, well, first of all there's the percentage return on investment. That's difficult to work out, as I said earlier, difficult to work out to know what the contribution of the capital is, or of the workers are, or what the contribution of the plant itself, or of the office, or the overheads. But having said all of that, it's important to try and work out what the return on the investment is. And if nothing else, look at the opportunity cost of the investment. In other words, look at what was given up in order to buy that piece of machinery, let's say. Because the money could have been used perhaps somewhere else and used more efficiently somewhere else. So it's important to look at the return on the investment. Look at the return on the overall assets employed. How many assets are employed within the business? The premises, the stores, the offices, as well as the machinery and so on. Look at the assets of the business and see how well they're being used overall, not just an individual piece of investment. Look at the profit margin on sales to see if the profit margin, let's say the gross profit margin, justifies that particular line of production. All should increase by some specific percentage change and to be accomplished by a specific date. So it's important when looking at the output of the business and trying to measure the output and the, if you like, the efficiency of the output of the business, looking at some sort of benchmark, saying the company wants, let's say, a 5% return or 5% change, positive change in certain measures, and it needs to be achieved by the end of the month or the end of the year. So it could be the return on a piece of capital, return on a piece of investment, or return on all the assets of the business. It could be they want to see the profit margins growing on particular lines of production. Market share, well, look at the percentage market share relative to the competition. Just look at the market share. How many competitors are there in the market, and what percentage of the market does the company account for? And see if that can be improved. Talk to the marketing department. See what initiatives can take place, and try to get measures of what the markets want vis-a-vis what the company produces, to see if there can be some sort of adjustment so that the percentage market share is increased. And try to look at the total market size and see if the percentage relative share can change. Now, that means looking at the whole size of the market. Sometimes markets can be very big, but the amount sold in the market is only a small proportion. Perhaps all the companies producing and selling in a particular market do not cover the whole market. Some people simply are still put off because they believe the product is of a bad design or it's overpriced or whatever. So look at the whole market. Look at the whole market if possible, and see what percentage of the market has been covered and what percentage of the market does the business have. And the market share should increase. There should be some sort of measure in place. The company should have some sort of measure in place that says the market share increases. That will give the company more security in the coming months and years, more stability in terms of employment, and a better opportunity to consolidate its position, and also to innovate new products and bring them into the market and create a brand so that the new products enjoy the benefits of being associated with a positive, successful brand. Customer satisfaction is also a measure of output. Or the product or service quality. And how should that be measured? Well, maybe it's done by the marketing department in the context of looking at surveys, market surveys, interviewing customers, focus groups. It could be measured in various ways to see if the product or service meets the requirements of the customer. It could be in terms of the rejection rates on the production process. Customers buy the product or try out the service, but they don't like it. They reject it. They make complaints or look for their money back or whatever. That might be an indicator of poor quality, and it's a measure of output, the suitability of the output to satisfy customer satisfaction. So sales returns are an issue. Both of these should decline by a specific amount in a specific time frame. So the company should set itself the target of ending sales returns so that the customers are fully satisfied with their purchases, they're happy with their purchases. In fact, they would recommend the product and there will be return sales. That's the objective. So to reduce the sales returns by a certain proportion over the coming weeks or months or whatever, and eventually get rid of the sales returns because the customers are so happy with the product. Delivery on time and in sufficient quantity. It's important that the customers receive the product in a reasonable time frame. Depends on the nature of the product. If they're ordering ocean-going liners or they're demanding submarines, well, the lead time is very, very long. But for most customers, being realistic, and for most products that we can think of, the customers want the product within a short time scale. Ideally, they want it now. They want it here and now. When they go into a shop, they want to be able to buy the product and take it away with them. They don't want to see a notice to say the product will be available in 3 weeks' time. Please call back. So delivery time in sufficient quantity. It should be enough there to satisfy the customer. And that could be an output measurement. So look at back orders and delivery statistics to see how well the company is doing in terms of delivery time, meeting the orders within a reasonable time scale, and honouring its commitments in terms of delivery. Back orders should decline and delivery cycles should improve over time. Those are measures of output, and these should be objectives of the business. The consumer prices, well, look at the retail price of the product. Is it reasonable given the production of the product, the technicality of the product, what the competitors are charging? Look critically at the price of the product. And the retail price matched to value should decline. So the retail price compared to the value that the customers get, the retail price should be reducing. So in other words, the customers are getting more value for less. And that should be the long run situation that the company is aiming at. As the price comes down and the value increases, the quality of the good, the suitability of the good, the design of the good, as those improve and the retail price comes down, customers are getting more value for money. And customers are more likely to come back, make repeat orders, and the company will thrive as a consequence. Social benefits, for example, consumer benefits. Well, improve consumer satisfaction. Customers must be happy with the product. It must, as I said earlier, it must meet their quality requirements, their delivery requirements. They must be available in the quantity that they want. So consumer satisfaction is very important. It's a part, if you like, of the social benefits. It improves the consumer's quality of life to be able to get the products that they want at the quality and the price that they want. There should be good consumer feedback. When the customers are surveyed about their opinions about the product, they should give good feedback. They should recognize that the product is good quality, it's at a good price, it meets their requirements, and they should feed this back. If there are criticisms, that should be fed back as well, because that will help the management of the business to further improve the product and to address the adverse feedback. There are environmental benefits. Reduce the carbon footprint, have a more greener way of producing the product. Cut out waste. That's essential. So reduce pollution. to reduce the carbon footprint and to reduce pollution means the company has got a green agenda, and this will fit with the expectations of the customers. It will promote the business in a very positive sense. We are all acutely aware of climate change and global warming and the future of the planet, and we live on this planet and we want it to continue. So companies that are helping in whatever way they can to improve the quality of the environment will be recognized by the customers, and the business may benefit from more sales and a higher profile, positive profile, as a consequence of this action. So it should try to reduce carbon emissions and, as I said, promote the green agenda. Develop input measures for each goal. Well, simple efficiency ratio would be outputs over inputs. But as I said many times in the course of these particular videos, that's easier said than done. It's difficult to measure the outputs, it's difficult to measure the inputs. Sometimes we might just do it on big aggregates. Look at the total number produced, the total number of cars produced, and the total amount of workers employed, or the total amount of invested, the total amount of capital in the car industry. These might give us rough indicators, but really it's very difficult to measure these. So having measured outputs, if we can measure outputs, now necessary to measure the inputs. So we could measure the inputs in terms of financial operating resources, having how much capital, money capital does the business have, how much in terms of working capital, how much has it got available in the event of there being a problem with the business, for reinvestment, for example. If it has to modify its production line, does it have the financial resources to do it? Has it got a reputation in the market which will enable it to borrow the money if need be? So what are the capital resources of the business? And of course there are other organisational resources, chief amongst which I think are the people involved, the skills, the aptitudes, the core competencies of the people. What can the people do, and what can they do almost uniquely that will further the business, further the business in the market? What can the people bring to bear, the workers, the managers, what can they bring to bear on the situation that will give the business a competitive advantage and enable the business to work and compete in that marketplace? But other organisational resources could also be the plant, the layout, the location of the plant, the capital equipment in the plant, the office, the structure of the business. There are many organisational resources that can be taken into account when looking at inputs. Now the financial operating resources, well, material and labour are an obvious example of operating resources. The materials and the labour have financial costs. The labour had to be trained, let's say, and the materials have to be bought into stores. So direct materials and direct labour per unit expressed in both machinery and quantity terms. Sorry, in monetary, not machinery, I beg your pardon, in monetary and quantity terms. Now, it is important to look at the direct labour and materials. How many iron bars are needed, let's say if we're talking about materials, to make a particular product? The quantity of raw material, how much is required? And also look at the cost of that. How much in financial terms does it need to make a particular output? So it's looking at direct materials and labour expressed both in monetary and quantity terms. Material and labour costs and our consumption per unit should decline over some specified period of time. So ideally, material and labour costs should decline as the company grows. It's able to gain the advantages of economies of size, economies of scale. So it may be able to have better negotiating power with suppliers for materials and get discounts. It may be able to bulk order and get discounts. And labour costs may reduce as well, as more efficient workers are employed and better training programs, and also the workers become more skilled in working on a particular job, performing particular tasks. So unit labour costs decline over time periods as well. Overheads, well, overheads are usually charged per unit. Now, cost and management accountants are very skilled at doing this. They can work out the overheads in terms of the cost of the premises, the insurance, the maintenance, and so on, and try to allocate it to the number of units produced. So divide out, take the total overhead charges of the business and divide them out by the number of units and get some sort of indication of how much per unit should be added on to cover the overheads. So it's not just the direct labour and materials, it's also the overheads that need to be added on to get some indication of the true cost of the output. Overheads consumed per unit produced should decline. Well, they should decline because as more has been produced, then on the average they should decline. The overheads are a fixed cost. The premises are fixed in size, let's say, and generally speaking, insurance and maintenance tend to be relatively fixed. So the more output that occurs, the smaller the overhead burden. So as the company grows, the overheads and the impact of the overheads on the cost, the unit costs, should decline. The capital resources of the business, well, the capital resources in operating assets, it's the percentage utilization of capacity, how much of the capacity of the business is being used. Ideally, it should be all of it. All the business should be working, and it should be working to full capacity. That's the ideal. But in practice, businesses may work at 80% or 70%, depends. And sometimes business people want to have some spare capacity just in case. But that is inefficient. The efficient use of resources is 100% capacity. Anything less is inefficient. But as I said, some management, some people involved in the decision-making process may want to keep something in reserve just in case. Just in case there's a big surge in orders, they've got the capacity to meet it. Dollars or pounds of capital investment per unit produced. So that's how we would work it out. How much investment, capital investment, per unit produced. When the company is thinking of making investment is the acquisition of new capital goods. When the company is thinking of getting new capital goods, making investment, it's how much per unit will that investment cost. If the company is producing 10 units of output and it makes an investment, then it'll be the cost of the investment divided by 10. If it's producing 1 million, it'll be divided by 1 million. Clearly there's a big difference. The percentage capacity utilized should increase or to remain at optimal levels. So ideally, as I said earlier, the utilization of the capacity should increase. The percentage utilization of the capacity should increase over time. That's important because that's an indicator of efficiency. Now, pounds or dollars or whatever the currency is, euros, per unit of capital invested should decline over time as capital resources are used more efficiently. So the per unit cost of capital invested should decline over time, because as more output is produced, that fixed cost, the cost of the capital, the fixed sum is being divided by a bigger and bigger denominator. The fraction is therefore getting smaller. Other organizational resources. Well, non-financial resources consumed by the performance area. Sometimes there are non-financial resources consumed. It may be back to impacts on the environment. Sometimes companies draw from the environment without recompense. Sometimes in the past companies might take water from a river, for example, and even return polluted water further along the river. Say it's a non-financial resource. That's because I suppose really the company, or some of the companies may act in a very non-ethical way. Management estimates of resources of talent and energy and other non-financial resources that have been dedicated to the performance area. Workers, when they're trained, they do acquire different skills, and sometimes the workers will want to work hard. They're motivated to work hard. It's not financial. The financial one is they meet the performance measures that are set down, but sometimes workers may exceed this because they're enthusiastic, they're interested, they're engaged in the work. But also the workers may be developing themselves. They may be attending evening school or doing online study or whatever. They're improving themselves, they're becoming more talented, and they're becoming more efficient at what they do. And that may affect the quality of the inputs and reduce their cost. The amount consumed will increase as the project is developed and decrease after it's implemented. And that generally is the case. During the development stage of a project, there will be a lot of discussions, a lot of skilled people involved in planning and ironing out issues and drawing up implementation plans and so on. And that will become more intense as the company gets nearer to actually doing it. But once the project has been implemented and is running, then the cost of the resources used may decline because there's output. And as the output increases, the average cost of these resources will fall. But also the company can see what the problems are in a very visual way. They can see issues that arise without the use of committees or advice from various experts. They can see in a practical sense what's going right and in a sense what's going wrong. Having said all of that, companies may use modeling techniques to try and simulate what is likely to happen and use the modeling techniques to iron out issues before the project is actually implemented. But the cost of sort of non-financial resources, the organizational resources as well, the cost of these will be considerable in the planning stage. But once it's been implemented and running, then the plans need to be tweaked, monitored, controlled, but in a sense it now becomes a routine task. Use of effective recognition system. Well, use measurement to initiate change. Use of measured results as a management tool. Well, that's really one of the big points of these particular talks on measurement and performance measures is that they are management tools. Management want to measure. They want to measure inputs and outputs. They want to have indicators, key performance indicators. They want to know what's going right and what's going wrong and how well particular resources are performing against benchmarks that perhaps the management have set up. Any shortfall in performance needs to be looked at. Any overperformance needs to be congratulated, but perhaps the original assumptions of the model were wrong. So the whole model might need to be revamped and relooked at. So it's management by looking at the processes and looking at the performance of the individual parts of the system that's important. Results should have an automatic intervention point and associated strategy. Management need to know when to get involved. Perhaps a particular subsystem is not achieving its key performance indicators. It's not achieving the results that were required. But that may be a temporary issue, which may be explained in various ways. So there's no need for high-level intervention. But it may also be the case that simply the fact that some areas are not hitting their required performance levels, that the feedback will require automatic intervention on the part of management. It'll trigger intervention. Management will want to know why, what's happened here, what's gone wrong, and try to put in some sort of corrective mechanism to see that it's fixed and it won't happen again in the future. Expected results should be rewarded with congratulations and act as reinforcement. It's important to take the people who do the job into account. They're humans, and when they've hit their targets, they should be congratulated. It's a job well done. It will increase motivation, it will increase application, and it'll affect quality. It'll improve quality. It'll improve application to the tasks. So when targets are met, that should be communicated to those who have achieved the targets. So build a culture. A good system requires careful application of the workers and management to ensure that it functions at peak efficiency. So it's important that the managers and the workers see eye to eye on what's required, and that they are, in a sense, supporting each other. The workers are sending back reports about the performance of that part of the system, and the managers are talking to the workers and looking for ideas and involving the workers. It's a collaboration which will help to improve the efficiency of the system. Improvements require motivation. It requires the involvement of the workers. It needs their comments and their suggestions. And seeing management being involved reinforces the enthusiasm and interest of the workers. So overall efficiency is promoted by more motivation and more involvement from the two parts. Involvement happens when people employ enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, leadership, and morale in their daily routines. The workers are spending their lives producing some component, involved in some part of the overall system of the business. So they are dedicating their lives. So it's important for them to be valued and for management to understand their contribution and to recognize it and tell them. It will foster a good sense of community and culture within the business. It will foster a collaboration, working together to try and improve the business, not fighting and pulling apart. So there'll be more commitment, more dedication, better leadership, better working conditions, better atmosphere at work. and those will lead to improvements and better performance measures. A good system requires a holistic approach, including workers and managers at all levels, incentive schemes, long-term and detailed commitments to its success. So trying to look at the person and look at the requirements of the system more holistically, more in total, and involving the workers, getting their opinions, making them feel valued, acting on their recommendations if that's desirable. All of this will build a culture which will help the performance measures improve. They will certainly work on the internal factors, the internal performance measures. The external ones may still be the reserve of the marketing department and the agencies who look out to the market to try and position the company within the market, the wider marketplace, and take on the competitors. But the development of a good culture, a good business culture, is certainly one that will improve business performance measures and indicate to management that it's doing the right thing, and when it's not, it'll flag it up and remedial action can be taken promptly so that the business overall has a good record, long run record of achieving its targets. It's a big subject, it's a big area, and it needs detailed consideration. It's well worthwhile going back over this video and making your own notes and playing the video over many times, making notes, adding it to what you've read, and understanding the importance of performance measures. That's all I'm going to deal with in the session, however, and we're going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.